Let's do something a little bit different today. I would like to touch on how being a combat veteran has translated into being an author and writing military experience shaped into science fiction world building. The reason I find this to be important and interesting is because it's been a cathartic experience for me for a lot of years, being able to express into words a lot of experience, lived stuff and training, things that most people don't see. The perspective that I carry is a little bit different than most people. I wasn't a line trigger puller, I was a line officer. And that meant that instead of being a first person shooter like the excellent author Jack Carr, I was on the team and planning side. So a lot of my experiences while I was in the blood and the mud, a lot of my experiences are based more upon the activities of planning and training and how to do, why we were doing, etc. And whereas a soldier being put into the line is not going to be placed into a position where they have to understand why we're going down XYZ road. I had to not only understand why we're going down that road, but I had to be able to express that clearly and articulate why we were going into these dangerous situations. My perspective was slightly different than most of what you would see in common Hollywood and writing, because while I started as a line officer, I did move into staff positions and participated in some high-level decisions. And those decisions, those conversations did color a lot of my early work and still do to today, because the experiences and the training don't leave. The inclusion of the realism, the tactical realism, has definitely helped a lot of what I've written. For a content focus, for example, how my experience as a United States Army combat infantry officer influenced the military structure, the combat sequences, and the tactical realism. In my book, The Guardsman, for example, it's the 3-book series of The Guardsman, is a science fiction work, but it's also about 3,000 to 4,000 years into the future. And while humanity hasn't changed, meaning the thought processes and stuff like that hasn't changed that much, the technology is vastly greater. Periodically, as an experienced combat officer, I will get into arguments with people about, the most recent was, drones are going to kill everybody, the battlefield is going purely to drones, da 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 da. These are tech guys who have never faced a weapon system in their life. And the more combat changes, the more it stays the same. When the bow and arrow was invented, I'm sure somebody was saying that spears were going out of style. When somebody first created a shield, everybody started panicking because now all of a sudden we can't shoot somebody with our arrows. And then through the millennia, the contest between the weaponeer and the armorer continued as the evolution of steel armor and the improvement of weapons continued. That arms race just kept going. And then the tactics changed, the procedures changed, the methods changed. And that long-term perspective of studying war over thousands of years of human history and having touched on each of those epochs gives a nice perspective that allows me to write, particularly for the Guardsman, and project forward and think, what are the tools that we are most likely going to be using? How frequently in an interstellar society are we going to be running into black powder weapons? Probably not that frequently, because over time, the higher ammunition capacity of launching a fraction of a gram flechette at a significant portion of the speed of light, if you can carry 210 rounds in your magazine and then use a electric current, for example, to propel your pellet down the barrel, and you've got 210 shots in your magazine, how much damage can you do? A lot. Whereas right now, if we're carrying 210 rounds as a basic load, you can do a lot of damage. Now you compact that into the evolution of military technology, and you can pack that single soldier with enough ammunition that they'd be able to confront and engage with many times more people than an entire squad worth of modern infantry could do, and you could do it with a simply more advanced weapon. Your contest between the weaponeer and the armorer conceptually does not change, but your weapon system used in the Guardsman series, which is the Gauss rifle, the railgun basically, It's a handheld railgun. Because the black powder is more or less obsolete, you don't run into it very frequently. It's also cheaper, because if the black powder, anybody can make it, but the problem is that it's explosive, you start running into bottlenecks over what weapon system do we pick. And the empires, the corporate empires, chose the more economical solution of using the railguns over the black powder. So as we enter the realm of railguns, if we're firing a flechette at a significant portion of the speed of light, when that flechette strikes, do you wear heavy armor or do you not wear armor at all? Because part of the reason that the knights stopped wearing heavy armor was because the firearms and the evolution of the high-end crossbows that could blow through the armor. Now, the crossbows were dealt with using archers. Longbowmen could outrange a crossbow and be more accurate. The armor versus the tactics and techniques and procedures that we have to keep in mind when we're going through like real life history and incorporating that into a realistic science fiction book, it's important. Because what will happen is you'll wind up with actions, reactions, results, and then your logical thinking enemy is going to change how they act and react. So if suddenly we've got this weapon that can blow through modern armor systems, what's the point of carrying modern armor systems? Just you're sending people out on the cheap with much better weapons. Your techniques might change, where you have greater distance between your soldiers. And that was the constant evolution, the constant argument and conversation that I had to have in the Guardsman. Discussing how that particular empire's, I named it the Chroynos Corporate Hegemony, which was basically they controlled the power output. So they had subscription base on every building on the planet, and they were just billing for power. They were building the landlords, and everybody else got to live their lives. Their elite forces are going to have certain ways of doing things. And because you're in a situation where you would need vastly heavier armor and or better reactions in order to win, that particular corporate empire decided to invest in a highly trained cadre of soldiers as their elite forces. Those elite, highly trained forces were supplemented by nanobot enhancements, which allowed them to train harder and recover and survive injuries that others would not be able to, while they're carrying the heavier armor and the heavier weapons with the better reaction times because they're better trained, better skilled, and they have improvements in their body. And how that would plug into a real military hierarchy is interesting, because where do you plug those elite forces in? How does a governing body position its elite forces? And the reason that I set it up to where they're called the Guardsmen. In the Guardsman Corps is the elite nanobot-enhanced, highly trained professional soldiers for this corporate empire. Having experienced how the Iraqi army worked, they basically had 3 armies stacked on top of each other. So you had the Iraqi army, which is effectively a conscript army, led by officers from Saddam's clan or tribe. Above them was the Republican Guard. Basically, everybody in the Republican Guard outranked almost everybody in the Iraqi army. They weren't precisely on top of, but a soldier, the Iraqi Republican Guard, outranked every soldier in the regular army. The ranks might have been similar, but they weren't going to be able to advance unless they were Republican Guard, meaning that you had to be certain pedigree politically, you had to be supporting Saddam, etc. And if memory serves, a lot of the officers and NCOs who commanded the Iraqi regular army were veterans of the Republican Guard. Now, above the Republican Guard, the guys who kept the Republican Guard in check were the Special Republican Guard. Those guys were really not nice fellas. And what they did was basically, if anybody in the Republican Guard got out of line, the SRG would find their families. And that's not really how I wanted to build out the military hierarchy for my science fiction, because it was effectively a Western doctrine science fiction. And that goes back to the precursor, the pre-story for the Guardsman, where the corporate empires were founded and formed by basically regional blocks that existed on Earth. So the Japanese and the Philippines and Taiwan might get together and shoot off a colony ship. China might get together and shoot off a colony ship. Eastern Europe might assemble their colony ship and shoot it off in a different direction. The United States and Western Europe would do the same. So effectively, you had military doctrines leading with these corporate empires. So they were hiring their own security and developing their doctrines based upon. I took the approach of how do you incorporate a special forces unit into the regular military when effectively that entire special forces group is trained their entire lives in a military academy. Effectively, it's 12 years of training, and then they do college level classes through the high school years, and then they commission at 18, 19 years old. And they're effectively taking commissions as officers, not enlisted for their elite Guardsman Corps. That was how the military experience that I possess in real life translated into the Guardsman in order to keep the realism of a Western style military structure that has grown up in this fictional science fiction universe because of how the corporate colonies were allocated. That was the most logical way to build it out. You've basically got a special forces corps that's composed entirely of officers doing everything. These guys are highly trained, highly motivated, highly paid, etc. Several of the scenes in particular where we're following our main character, Samson, he gets very practical on people from both a individual perspective in gunfights and with spy versus spies kind of stuff where they're trying to survive. And I don't want to spoil because probably haven't read it yet. But for example, early on, our main character is doing detective work because he got himself in trouble and basically got banished. You've got this elite super soldier doing detective work, and he's up against a bunch of criminal types, and he's like sneaking around and doing that kind of ninja stuff. How does that translate in? It's not easy, but you can pull that together and you can do the basic sneaking kind of stuff that you learn in the army. Obviously, you want to be a little bit more aggressive and crazy when you're operating on your own than when you're operating in a team, because not everybody in your team can move at the same pace, etc., blah, blah, blah. But effectively, when he's infiltrating this criminal organization and scouting them out, he's moving alone against an organization, so he can move and react and do things, make decisions much faster because he doesn't have a chain of command he has to worry about. He doesn't have anybody he's coordinated with. Another scene, he's in a running gunfight. So Samson is in a position where he's protecting VIPs, and he's in a running gunfight from a bunch of assassins. And these are highly trained assassins. And basically, I was using my own MOUT training at how do I chase this target. So I had to put myself into the position of the assaulting force because they're operating from a similar military doctrine. Whereas when you take Samson, he's also operating from a similar military doctrine, but he has to fight in a specific way because he has people he has to protect in the process of. So there's a whole VIP defense detail stuff that we want to keep in mind. And then there's the basic elements of just a gunfight using railguns, which is different than we would be dealing with right now. But when you're slinging projectiles at 20,000 meters per second, what does it sound like? It probably sounds like a lightning crack. What happens when a lightning cracks? You're going to get ozone in the air. When you're sending that flechette downrange, it's going to be ionizing the air, and you're going to be getting that lightning crack sound, that hypersonic crack that's going to sound like lightning. And then as this thing is burning through the air, releasing ions, it's going to leave a white trace. So maybe we're not seeing green and blue and whatever color lasers shooting back and forth. Maybe it looks like a lightning strike, which is where I went with my descriptions of the technological use of the railguns shooting back and forth. How we contrast from Hollywood is that I've actually seen stuff blow up in front of me, so I know better than there being a big fluffy orange explosion for people to walk away from to be cool with. When I am writing my stuff, we are not in a position to believe big fluffy orange explosions. When something blows up, it's brown, it's dirty, and it's instant. Your vision goes white, and when things clear out, assuming you're still there, when things clear out, it's brown, there's plumes of dirt hanging everywhere, and it's a mess you gotta clean up. So I know better than the Hollywood stuff. Let's talk about a couple of quick tips when you're writing specifically military science fiction without service experience. You can acquire a good deal of knowledge by watching. The caveat to that is that you're not going to know the weight of the weapon, you're not going to know the stress, you're not going to know the heat and pressure of the body armor on you, etc. Get it, got it, good. You can watch videos of live combat. You can watch videos of training, and you can pick up a lot of the basic mechanics by paying attention to people who have. There's a ridiculous number of combat veterans leaving service every year during the last 20 years. There are a shitload of people out there who have experience and know what they're talking about. So it becomes more important for us to actually know what we're talking about and describe things in a way that is believable and carries the realism. For example, in a lot of zombie stories, the trained soldier is the one who's screaming and yelling and standing on top of a wrecked car and just shooting machine gun down into the crowd and going, ah! And then they get dragged under and they scream and they die and everybody else runs away. Not really how soldiers react. So you're probably going to want to make sure that you have a good deal of time and patience and questions asked before you go diving into making stuff up, because you can run afoul of the realism thing. Me in particular, I have been in the realism piece, and one specific example is I was reading a Star Wars book years and years and years ago that my dad had sent me while I was overseas. I'm in the middle of the desert and we all wore gloves. Why? Because every time you touched something, it would sear the skin off your palm because it was that damn hot. So I'm reading this book that my dad sent me, and the main character touches this thing in the desert of Tatooine, and it's like, it's 90 degrees out here and it's super hot and we're all dying, and I'm sitting at 120 degrees, and I know that if I touch metal with my hand, I'm probably searing my palm off and leaving it cooking on the metal. The more accurate you are with things that would translate into science fiction, the better off you're going to be. That's the advice for authors writing military and science fiction who don't have service experiences. Try to learn as much as you can before you get into it, because it turns into a credibility issue. And as soon as you break the immersion by not having your credibility ready, you're going to struggle keeping your audience. I think we'll call it. It's been a little bit longer than I would normally like to do, but from a combat veteran to author, it's been a heck of a ride so far. Military experience has definitely shaped my science fiction world building to a strong degree. I hope that makes sense and it helps somebody out. Have a great day.